would be hard to overstate the healing potential of neurodivergent friendships. And also, there are some challenges to these relationships between folks who have maybe the same or different neurotypes that are outside the neurotypical norm. In this video, I'm going to chat a little bit about some observations that I've had as a person who has ADHD and is autistic about friendship. Some of the things I've noticed, some of the things that have been challenging and have been awesome in terms of having friendships with other neurodivergent folks, and some reflections that might help you to think about your own friendships, or if you are a neurodivergent person with mostly neurotypical friends, to maybe just consider what's possible. If you're new here, hi, my name is Avery, and I help justice-aligned, neurodivergent, and nerdy humans to cultivate ease and self-trust in growing towards our emerging future. Friendship is a topic that I'm really passionate about as somebody who cares about justice and liberation and anti-capitalism and moving away from harmful systems in the wider world, because I think that there's a lot of potential within the container of friendship for us to shift norms, for us to challenge harmful systems and harmful ways of being that we might not have considered. Friendships can be a space of shifting our perspectives. It can also be a really tremendous space for affirmation, validation, comfort, and care. And friendships can be challenging. And for some of us, friendships are actually a space of a lot of trauma and a lot of challenge and a lot of pain, particularly if we've had experiences of maybe not understanding our own neurodivergence and not understanding why the other kids didn't want to be friends with us. That's a really common experience for a lot of us that might actually push us away from friendship or make us scared of making friends or feel like we can't make any friends or bring us to be more isolated. And of course, friendships with other neurodivergent folks can be really healing in this regard, and also imperfect. I also think that friendship is something that we sometimes don't generally in society prioritize as much as other relationships, like family relationships and romantic relationships. Not to say that friendship can't be romantic, but generally speaking, there's this kind of emphasis on those named relationships in our lives, and then friends are kind of seen as a second tier. And I think that a lot of times neurodivergent folks can be more expansive around that and make more space for it. Or if we don't really know that's an option, then, there's new territory for us to explore. I've been thinking about this topic for a while, and I recently saw a video that I'll try to remember to link below, where Danny Donovan and a couple of ADHD creators, Danny Donovan and, oh my god, blank, it's Lindsay, right? Lindsay, of How to ADHD. If I got the name wrong, I'm so sorry, but How to ADHD. They were talking about their ADHD friendship and some of the things that they've noticed in their own friendship and that have been helpful to them in their friendship, and some of the challenges that they have as well. One of the main topics that they talked about was kind of inconsistency and the way that you can be with another ADHD person. You can have really strong feelings and really fond feelings for that person, and then they're just out of sight, out of mind. You can kind of forget they exist. And that one thing that can be really nice, especially for ADHDers, about friendships with each other is that there's an understanding there, and there's hopefully not as much hurt and pain and being offended if somebody basically forgets you exist, because it's a very understandable experience, and that doesn't mean anything about the degree to which you care about that person or how much you love being around them. It's just literal out of sight, out of mind. So I thought that was a really good example. I find that with friendship, for me, there's a lot of tension, and you may have noticed this in your own life, between sort of liking and appreciating and desiring this permission for inconsistency. I feel like this has been a big theme in my relationships in general throughout my life, is that I really value the kinds of people who can be apart for a long time, and then when you come back together it feels just like no time has passed. It has that same intensity of feeling. And I think especially in recent years, I've just started to notice the ways in which, as much as I love that and value that, that can also be challenging And sometimes I think, one of the challenges maybe with neurodivergent friendship is that we have so much more permission for different ways of being, for playing with the boundaries and the ways that relationships happen, that sometimes we might actually go too much to an extreme of, oh, it turns out like some of those like friendship norms or assumptions or rules like might have been helpful in some way. And this is one where I think that can be true, where like you feel so good and validated about being able to kind of disappear and then come back. But it can be also an experience of kind of like isolation, or, it would be helpful to actually like have that poking, have those reminders. Sometimes when I'm in a place where I'm really like not keying into relationships in my life, it's actually helpful that, some of the few like neurotypical friends I have will have the like automatic thing in their brain that's like, okay, ping, 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 or even just non-ADHD friends, not necessarily neurotypical, but folks who like have that kind of natural consistency of like, oh, I haven't heard from you in a while, and so let me check in with you. Sometimes that can be helpful for me too, because it, as much as I might not love the idea of, I don't know, like having to keep regular communication with someone, and sometimes those conversation topics are less interesting to me than the conversations I have with neurodivergent friends, it is a good like reminder for me to be like, oh right, relationship, I should like check in with all of my friends. And so that's something that I've been like playing with, kind of trying to understand my own needs in terms of like how consistent I need relationships to be, or want relationships to be. What does that look like? I think often the nice thing about being friends with neurodivergent folks, and this is kind of like especially autistic, but I think a lot of neurotypes would relate to this, that it's like really helpful to be explicit and clear in communication. And so one of the things you can talk about is like, hey, I'm experiencing this. I've noticed that like a lot of times neurodivergent friends were much more comfortable with kind of meta conversations of like, here's what I'm experiencing in this friendship, or like, here's the challenge I'm having with friendships in general. I just want you to let you know I'm going through this, so that you like don't feel like it's some other thing that's happening, that like I have a problem with you or anything. And like I would love you to like sit with me in this challenge and like play and try different kinds of like cadences of communication and different ways of doing things. I think Danny and God, I hope it is Lindsay, but I think they talked about that as well, like that experience of, sometimes being like a little hurt or feeling like, oh, is something happening, and then going, oh, like, no, it's just something going on in your life. I think Danny does a really cool thing that I am considering adopting. It never occurred to me, which is putting specific emoji next to people's names in contacts, so that it reminds her that they're going through something, that they're going to be less available. I can't remember the emoji it is, but there's a particular emoji she uses for like going through something, which is both a reminder of like, hey, don't worry if they don't get back to you, but also, oh, maybe like check in on the people who have this emoji in front of their name. And I thought that was a really interesting way of doing it. I've had some conversations with an autistic friend of mine that I like really appreciate them and our friendship and the way we can communicate about these things, that we've talked about, the very like active process of trying to figure these things out. And we've tried like experimenting with different ways of doing things. So, sometimes it might feel like, oh, I don't want to get like pinged a lot or poked a lot because I feel weird about it, or I feel embarrassed that I'm not responding. But then if I notice that out of sight, out of mind thing, I might say like, hey, just like if you don't hear back from me, it doesn't mean anything, but poke me again. Like I actually want to have regular pokes. And sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. Like if someone asks me to do that, I might be like, I'll try, but I might forget about you myself. Figuring out the balance is a thing. But like another thing that they talked about kind of related to that was that Danny was saying, a preference actually for synchronous communication, that even though, we don't often talk about how neurodivergent people really like asynchronous communication because it puts less pressure on the relationship. It's asynchronous, meaning like something where someone sends you a message and you don't have to respond in that moment live. So that would include text messages, things like Marco Polo or Voxer. There's lots of tools, video messages. But that Danny actually likes it when people FaceTime her, because she was saying that, like, unless she's really like in the middle of something, that most of the time she will pick up a FaceTime and will appreciate and like needs to have that live contact with somebody. Because if it's asynchronous, then there's this kind of buildup, and I so related to this, where it'll be 6 months, and then she has to like write a whole paragraph about why she didn't respond, and then actually respond to the text along with the paragraph. And I do this constantly. If you have a personal relationship with me, I'm sure you've gotten at least once one of these, like, here's what's been going on in my life for 6 months. And it was interesting because my initial reaction was like, oh God, I would not want somebody to just like video call me out of the blue. And I think that's still true, I think. Because there is a certain degree of like, oh my God, I'm in a flow, I don't know about that. Like that still feels disruptive. And it's interesting because I noticed, like, living, for example, with a couple of partners, that like sometimes those spontaneous connections are really nice. I remember as a kid, like, always wanting to have the best friend who would just like knock on your door, and that was normal and that was okay because you had that level of comfort with each other. And maybe there is something to that, of like, especially somebody where it's like, I might not pick up, and if I don't pick up, it means I can't talk right now. But it's an interesting like idea to experiment with. Is the boundary that I've set for myself necessarily accurate? Because as much as it is nice to know that like I don't have to respond at any given cadence, it does mean that I very often, and I hate it when it happens with the same person because it does look like I'm being a jerk to them, but like very often we'll just like see a message, look at it, be like, okay, cool, yeah, I'll like process it, I might even think about it, and I don't respond. And I don't know, if you can tell me in the comments if this is you, but I think this is a very common thing of like, oh yeah, I totally thought about your message, and like I responded in my head, but I did not respond. And so like, yeah, there is that pressure of having things waiting for you. I think Danny talked about like having a period where you can't respond to things, and then when you can, you come back and there's like 20 things that you have to respond to, and it's too much. And I think that can totally happen. So, I think in that regard that there's like, I like that in neurodivergent friendships, I think there is a lot of like play and room for experimenting, and it's important for us to like keep checking in with ourselves about whether the norms we've set are working for us and what we're needing in the moment. Another thing that I noticed just about friendship as a neurodivergent person that maybe neurotypical people don't always understand is I forget facts like really easily. So, like, let's say you've told me a story, and you're like, you had this whole story and it was involved and it was emotional and it was a big deal for you, and maybe I even like gave you some advice and we talked about it, and like I remember this as being a thing. And then later I'll be like, oh my God, like, that situation you're going through, or like you're feeling really betrayed like by your sister, and the person will be like, do you mean my girlfriend? Like, yeah, the betrayal story, like, that's an important detail. Is it my sister? Is it my girlfriend? And I'm like, I mean, I understand that that's true, but I sort of remember the emotional content, the emotional context of the story, and like the weight of it, and like the conversation we had, way more than I'm going to remember even very important details, like what was your relationship with the person, how many people were involved, like stuff like that, they'll just like drop off. And I think a lot of times, not all neurodivergent people like are like this, but I think a lot of times there's a like understanding that your memory isn't tied to how important someone was, whether you were paying attention, etc. You can understanding that we process information differently and we remember information differently, and so like it's not insulting. I was joking with a sweetie the other day, like we've been dating for over a decade. At most points in that time, I could not tell you the other people that person was dating. I don't really know. I don't know their names. I can't remember anything about them. I don't know if they're local, if they're long distance. I mean, occasionally I remember a name and get all the other facts wrong. But I understood like the trajectory that person was on, like the journey that person was on in relationships, and like that kind of content, that context. And this is something that I've actually found like human design really interesting in how it resonates with some of these things I'm talking about. So like when I was talking about like wanting somebody to kind of knock on the door and come through, like one example is my environment in human design is called blended caves, and it's this idea of, I'm doing great, by the way, like this basement is totally a cave, you know, having a space that's kind of underground, cozy, but it should have 2 doors, which I do, one on each side, and people are like coming through. So it's the idea of like having, it's your space and it's protected and you can close the doors if you need to, and this feels very Cancer too in astrology. You can close the doors, but like people flow, you know, and you can interact with them as they come through. And so I've thought about how it's so funny that I have that environment. It's just I've had this environment through a pandemic, and so nobody can flow through. But like that really speaks to that like desire to, somebody can knock on the door, but I can say yes or no. The thing about facts and context, also like in human design, there's one of the arrows in the human design chart that speaks to this kind of thing of like, do you tend to remember facts and details, or do you tend to like relate in the like big picture context sense? And so like I've been thinking a lot about some of those more like detailed, deeper levels, pieces of human design when I think about this kind of stuff. Yeah, so and by the way, I will just like throw in a little like plug / note. It is not live yet, but I have been piloting a new human design thing that is about interactions, and especially family interactions, but any kind of like people, very relationship anarchist view on family, like interactions with your close people. So this could be a really close friend. I'm highlighting this report that people I've tried it with have been like totally blown away and really excited by it, and it's like bringing up a lot of energy in me. So I think it will be a public release pretty soon. If you want to know about that and like probably get a bit of a discount, know about it first, newsletter link is below, so definitely sign up for that newsletter so you know when that's coming. And feel free to reach out to me and let me know if you're like, hey, I definitely want to be cued into that, because I get into a lot of the stuff with like the arrows and the kind of like deeper level of the chart. So another thing with this is I think like when you think about conversations with neurodivergent people and some of the kinds of things that we like to talk about, you know, I already kind of like queued up that when talking about context versus facts, I'm really interested in people's journeys, you know, people's like what's going on with them. And I mean, I like getting into the details, even though I don't remember them. People's self-discovery journeys, people's spiritual development, people's, you know, how they're like, what they're playing with, what they're experimenting with in life. A lot of times this connects to my interest in theory, because I think it is interesting to like talk to folks about how they're applying theories, whether it's like tarot or astrology or things like personality typing or just like general concepts that they've learned about and heard about and they're trying out in their lives. The kinds of stuff I talk about on this channel, like I love, you know, exploring that in friendship, and especially because in friendships, I think you often, when you get to share about like, go back and forth about what's happening for you and for the other person in the context of these like theories and systems and ideas, you're getting really good like embodied examples of like testing out, oh, does this idea make sense to me? Like, how do they experience it versus how do I experience it? And so those are the kinds of things that I really like love chatting about in friendships. And I find that a lot of neurodivergent people, because of our challenges in moving about the world, tend to be more interested in this. We tend to be doing like more work, not necessarily always. Of course, neurotypical people, y'all can totally be into self growth and exploration, but like because of that common interest, often is an interest in neurodivergent people, that can be a real like gift of neurodivergent friendship. Also just the gift, and again, this might be more like for autistic friends, but the gift of being able to bond through talking about knowledge and like theory and sharing. I think this can sound really dry if you don't know what I'm talking about. It might sound like, oh, I don't want to sit around like spouting facts and theories to my friends. But so many of my conversations, especially with autistic friends, are like, oh my God, I read this book. Let me like outline the theory for you and how I'm thinking about it. Or I realized this thing about my chart and I just want to tell you about it. Those kind of conversations are much easier for me to connect with than things like, small talk or like talking about, I don't even want to say small talk because I think that's unfair to neurotypical people, but like a long and involved story about something that's happening with your kids that's all about, how do I even say this? Like all about, I guess, like the emotional experience without kind of putting it in some sort of a structure or framework or here's my purpose for talking about this, or like here's the thing I want you to reflect on. I get very lost in the story and I just can't, it doesn't feel important to me and I can't relate to it, even though obviously I know it's important for that person and I try my best. You know, having like regular updates with people about just stuff in life, I'm like, I need like an anchor. I need something to connect to. And that's something I think neurodivergent people are more likely to understand. I already talked about being explicit about boundaries, being explicit in general, just being able to talk at that meta level. But yeah, being explicit about boundaries, talking about communication preferences, that being a norm, that being okay. I've definitely had neurotypical friends where I tried to set an expectation or talk about that and they were very confused. Like, why are we, like, wow, Avery, you're like, I'm not like a classroom experiment. Like, why are you asking me these questions? I'm like, because I don't know how to relate to you unless I have the answers. So that, you know, can be helpful to have somebody who understands like the value of that. And then the last thing that noticing is around sort of the, I guess, relationship between, oh, well, and before I say this, I'll also just add that part of that explicit communication as well is like, it's not just with each other, but it's also like, I think there's a validation a lot of times in having similar experiences, that if you tell a story or you're talking about something you're struggling with, there's an understanding of like the scope and how big a deal something is and like what it's like to have low spoons. And this is also true just in like friendships with people with disabilities, like anybody who really has a context for what that's like. Because if I'm telling you a story about challenges I'm having and how, you know, I didn't manage to do much more than brush my teeth today. It's like a lot of times an autistic friend will be like, good job brushing your teeth. Have you considered water? You know, it's like we're staying at like the scope. It's not like, oh my God, it's a total failure of a day. Understanding like how I relate to time and energy. And generally having this shared understanding that like it's about encouraging each other, understanding the kinds of things that might trigger some stuff, the kinds of things that might feel like overculture is imposing. And knowing, I think we know that we're like, you get enough of that from overcultural messages. So like, I'm not going to be the person who's going to tell you, you know, rah, rah, achieve all your goals. You need to do that, right? Unless you're like really asking for support in that. I'm generally going to be like, encourage rest, encourage like small steps. And so having people who validate that that's okay is really important as well. And then, yeah, the other like interaction with the wider culture thing, I think, is just like kind of coming full circle to what I talked about at the beginning. It's like being able to make your own rules, being able to decide like what relationships are important to you, and being able to define each relationship on its own terms. Being able to say, you know, here's how we want communication to work in our relationship. Here's like the kind, you know, maybe with this friendship, we schedule a regular call. Maybe with this other friendship, you know, we're doing more texting, whatever it is. Like taking each relationship one by one and being able to say, like, sometimes a friendship takes a bigger portion of your life than a romantic relationship, than a family relationship. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes friends are like part of a big group. Sometimes it's just a one-on-one interaction. So there's this like relationship anarchist bent, I think, to neurodivergent friendship sometimes, of just understanding the importance of friendship and also how DIY it can be. And that's really important. And I think, like, I'll say that if this stuff doesn't resonate with you and you are neurodivergent and you have neurodivergent friends, and you feel like, oh God, I wish my experience was like this, then like start the conversation with the friends, you know, like see if you can make space for this. And even with your neurotypical friends, you can ask for little things and like little adjustments. And if there's something that I said in this video that you're like, oh, I wish I had that, then like, share the video with a friend, chat about the thing that particularly, appealed to you or that you want more of, and see if you can make space for that. So yeah, that's my thoughts on neurodivergent friendship. Do sign up for the newsletter below if you haven't already, so you can know when stuff's happening, know when there's new content on this channel, but also blog posts, free resources, new offerings, etc., etc., etc. And then leave a comment below and let me know, especially if you are neurodivergent. You can let me know, what other ideas you have about friendship maybe I didn't cover. Does this resonate with you? If you're neurotypical, I'm curious if if you actually made it through the end of this video. That's cool. But like if you are neurotypical, maybe you could leave a comment as well and let me know, was anything surprising in this video? Like, how do you find some of the things I talked about like harder for you? And like, what is that experience like? Kind of like feeling like on the back foot a little bit. I'd love to hear from you in the comments, and otherwise we'll see you in the next video.